Okay. All right.
So
Okay.
this is good.
So we're working on starting this book.
Yeah, I ordered it and it should come in the mail today, but
Right.
not in my hands yet.
Okay. This is a long chapter, so we might just read maybe half of it, and next week start up on it. We'll see. You want to read?
All right.
Okay. Great.
This is chapter 2, consciousness and awareness. Maharishi, if you know what this waking consciousness is, you will know the consciousness which witnesses all three states. Such consciousness could be found by seeking the consciousness as it was in deep dreamless sleep. Questioner, in that case, I fall asleep. Maharishi, no harm. Questioner, it is a blank. Maharishi, for whom is the blank? Find out. You cannot deny yourself at any time. The self is ever there and continues in all states. Questioner, should I remain as if in sleep and be watchful at the same time? Maharishi, yes. Watchfulness is the waking state. Therefore, the state will not be one of sleep, but sleepless sleep. If you go the way of your thoughts, you will be carried away with them, and you will find yourself in an endless maze. Questioner, so then I must go back tracing the source of thoughts. Maharishi, quite so. In that way, the thoughts will disappear, and the self alone will remain. In fact, there is no inside or outside for the self. They are also projections of the ego. The self is pure and absolute. Questioner, it is understood intellectually only. It is not intellect. Is not intellect a help for realization? Maharishi, yes, up to a certain stage. Even so, realize that the self transcends the intellect. The latter must itself vanish to reach the self.
Okay, great. Let's stop there for a second. So let's go over the disclaimer. The disclaimer means that you will never be able to always remain in awareness in order to achieve self-realization. That's not what he's talking about. This is not like the silver bullet and I'm going to be able to do this and then become self-realized. Because it's implying that there is somebody there doing this inquiry in order to get something. Okay? Second thing is, I went through this as a seeker and got very fascinated about this deep sleep state. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the personal struggle I went through for months and how that got dropped. So first of all, last week, Mary, I don't think you were here, but in this book, there's 22 chapters. And in the line of inquiry, what Ramana has done is shown that there's 22 areas that we can have self-inquiry as far as objects of inquiry. That this is going to be the object of our thought. Does that make sense? This is what we're going to think about.
Right, so there's 22 different possible things you could think about in the course of inquiring or use for inquiring.
Yes. So last week it was about feelings. The inquiry was feelings and thoughts. Who's having this thought? Who's having this feeling? Now this week he's talking about consciousness. So when we are awake, we are conscious. When we are the waker, there's consciousness exists. We say, okay, that's the starting point. And then we know, and this is where you have like step one. You have an area or a topic of inquiry. So I'm going to inquire about consciousness. Step two is then we have to bring, like you said, the intellect in and start. And how do we bring the intellect in? Well, we have to bring in concepts from our previous reading and help us with inquiry. So where I see a lot of people get stuck is they don't have this kind of background knowledge, and they don't know the topics or other information, pure information or knowledge to bring in to help with their inquiry. And so that's where I'm going to be hopefully helpful today. So the first area is line of inquiry, and that line of inquiry is consciousness. And then we're going to start bringing in the more information to help us with this inquiry. Does that make sense so far? Okay, and then the disclaimer is this is not going to guarantee towards enlightenment.
No kidding.
And that, you know, up to a point, the intellect has to be used. And so, unfortunately, what I see in a lot of people doing inquiry is they start from the very end and they say, well, intellect can't get there, so I'm not going to use the intellect at all. And as you read, he says that yes, up to a certain stage. So up to a certain stage, the intellectualization, the concepts, the conceptualizing is very necessary. He doesn't say very necessary, but that's my italics. I'm putting in that it's very necessary. And what happens when he refers to transcending the intellect, in my experience, the way I would refer to that is that there is a dropping away of that entity or person that is inquiring about that particular object of inquiry. So it doesn't mean that realization happens, but for instance, we're talking about deep sleep. There can be a point where, and this was my experience, where I was really interested in deep sleep and inquiring about it. And there's a point where the inquiry, I realized I wasn't going to get an answer. So that part of me that was inquiring dropped off. And so that line of thinking also dropped off. And so there was transcending, and by transcending, there was, the way I interpret transcending is there was a freedom in that there was no longer any concern about deep sleep. That line of inquiry, that was a preoccupation in the mind, dropped off. So it's not like I got an answer. Instead, there's a freedom of this almost compulsion to do inquiry. Does that make sense? So, for example, if there's 22 lines of inquiry and one doesn't really resonate with you, then he's not saying you have to pick it up. Because that would be like creating a job and then you have to quit the job. This is only any of these 22 areas of inquiries, like, oh yeah, I think about this. And so hopefully this line of inquiry, and with the discussion and pointers, etc., you'll be able to be a letting go of this line of inquiry.
So it's inquiry is a step, or inquiry is a step, or it's valuable to do inquiry. We're talking about how to do inquiry, I guess. But then ultimately the goal is that it drops off.
Inquiry, that's a good question. So what is inquiry? Inquiry is an uncontrollable obsession of thinking about a particular non-dualistic concept. That's how I would define inquiry. True inquiry is like you can't stop doing it. It's like a compulsion, an obsession. And so that is one thing. It's already there. And the intellectualization or the use of the intellect is the first step, or in the beginning stages of trying to eliminate that obsession. But true inquiry is an obsession itself. So that's why I'm saying don't try to just have an obsession, create an obsession. One of these 22 lines of inquiry will hopefully match up with an obsession that you have and reveal this obsession so that you can get rid of it. He's not saying, oh, this isn't connecting with you, this isn't resonating with you, you must start inquiring. That's like saying, I'm going to have to start obsessing over this, and that's not what he's doing. So for a person that would be obsessing or thinking about or reflecting about the states of consciousness, the person would be, what is this consciousness? There's consciousness here. There's awareness here. We know that. That's like a given. And so the first step to try to get you to think about more deeply about consciousness is he's pulling from concepts from the Upanishads that this consciousness exists in the three states of consciousness: the waking state, the dream state, and the dreamless state, or the deep sleep state, it's called. So that's where when you're thinking about consciousness, the next step is to pull in information that will help you do a line of inquiry. So then we know about, he brings in this other concept about witnessing. And witnessing is called Sakshi Bhavana in Sanskrit. And it means that there's a deep feeling that there is a witnesser in these three states of consciousness. So that's where it goes from more of an intellectual to more of an intuitive understanding. That it's just not, okay, I can understand that there's a awareness in the waking state, awareness in the dream state, and awareness in the sleep state, but it's more than that. That's just intellectual understanding. Where there's where the intellectual understanding gets deeper is when he introduces this idea of witness. And you start to now inquire a little deeper and say, wait a minute, when there's three states of consciousness, there's somehow I know as the waker that there's three states of consciousness and that there's been an experience of the three states of consciousness. One is what's happening now. Two, there is a witness that was in the dream state that was able to register all that was happening in the dream state. You go, okay, yeah, I can start to see that a little bit more. I can start feeling it a little bit more. If I had a dream last night, there was something there that was witnessing the dream. Now that witnessing the dream, he's saying, is very similar to that which is also present here in the waking state. Now, what we need to do is inquire that there's something here in the waking state, just like witnessing in the dream state. So that would be a little deeper line of inquiry. Does that make sense?
Yes, and can I say something?
Uh-huh.
My concern is that this may turn into just a useless conceptualization. So instead of true inquiring, which you point to, I may just start conceptualizing that witness that is behind the waking state and behind the dream state as well. Is that a danger? Is that a trap?
So when you say conceptualizing the witness, what does that mean?
It's like the idea of that formless Brahman. Like you create a concept of there is some kind of a formless Brahman, and you kind of get your attention is consumed with that concept. The same thing. You're instead of spontaneously meditating into that, or floating into that witnessing state, if that is possible, you may just get stuck into that concept of, well, there must be some witnesses here, some witnessing here.
Right.
Common both to the witnessing state and the dreaming state.
Right. So there's the seed of in your question, there's the seed of the answer. Because you say, can't this be a trap? Well, first of all, you're already in a trap. And second of all, this is a way to get you out of the trap by, if you think of this trap as an obsession, or what would also be an identification. I'm obsessing over the thought that I think I'm doing everything, or that there is no witness. So what this is supposed to do, and if we go back to what we talked about last week, in the very first week, is this type of inquiry happens spontaneously, like you said. It's really, if you approach this fairly logically and with common sense, there's very room to suffer in life. And I'll explain what I mean. Let's say you're at work. When you're at work, you're involved with work. And the working mind, as Ramesh would say, is working. There's no suffering there. There's involvement. Then we come out of work, and there's where the potential of suffering can happen. And then, because all sorts of things can happen, we can judge about the working process, how well we did, and then we can say, well, I didn't really like that activity, or now I have to go on to another activity that I don't like to do. But that's where inquiry comes in. So last week we were saying with the feeling, I don't like to do this. In a perfect world, we come out of work and say, oh, I don't really like that work, and I don't like to go to the next one. So what he's saying is, here's a thorn, here's a tool. Ask who is upset about their job performance. And that cuts off the involvement. And then what do? You go to the next job. And then you go in the job, working mind is there, gets involved, and then you come out of it. You do that, your 8 hour a day work day goes by very quickly. And there's no room for suffering. And then you just continue to do that with your drive home, when you get home, or whatever. So here, he's trying to bring light to this witness that is here and that's also present in the dream state. And so we simply have to understand that this can spontaneously rises, this inquiry. Otherwise, we turn the solution for the obsession into an obsession. And that's the trap. So we don't want to obsessively think about the solution for the obsession thinking. So now the next level of inquiry that goes a little deeper, and this is where it can be very powerful. When you say there's no one there in the deep sleep, in the dreamless slate, it's a blank slate, so to speak. What is the deep sleep? So again, you have to pull some information from reading books and texts of what is the deep sleep state. And this is where information, the intellectualization, the knowledge helps, because you have to have the right material in order to reflect. So the deep sleep state is a couple things. It's the absence of the waker and the dreamer. It's the absence of the individual. Another definition is it's when vasanas are present. And what are vasanas? Vasanas are unmanifested desires. And what does that mean? Unmanifested desires mean that the individual has not manifested yet. So in the deep sleep state, they call it also a seed state. The seed is underground and you can't see it. Just like but there's, what he's saying is that there's a awareness there that something's blank. And in that state, the dreamer and the waker don't even exist yet. Now, when the deep sleeper manifests into the dreamer, it's like the seed has turned into a sprout. So if you look at my screen, the deep sleep state is at the bottom of the screen, nothing, blank. Then the dreamer, it's like a sprout. And then in the waking state, there's a full manifestation of the tree or the individual. So in the individual is the waker, fully manifested. Dream state is when the dreamer is partially manifested as the sprout, and the deep sleep is the seed. Another way to look at the seed is this, the potential for the individual. It's just potentiality there.
So the dreaming and waking state. So the vasanas are in the deep sleep state, but in the dreaming and waking state, the effect of the vasanas is being felt because they've sprouted into some kind of activity, or?
Yes. So it's an interest. So this itself is another, and this is exactly about the line of inquiry, that just by thinking about this deep sleep state, there's a new line of inquiry that happens spontaneously, and that is what happens to these vasanas. So if you look at a fully manifested tree, at one point there was a seed. At one point it took the form of seed. But can we say that the seed has disappeared? It doesn't have any connection with the tree? No. It's like the seed exists within the tree. In fact, the seed permeates the whole tree. Is now in an unmanifested form. If we turn it into, the seed goes into the tree, it's like, well, what happened in the seed? Did it just disappear? No, that seed is transformed and it permeates all the tree now. So Does that make sense?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So then you say, well, there's these vasanas is actually manifesting and permeating this body-mind mechanism as a waker as I'm speaking right now. Yes.
And those vasanas, they're composed of gunas, right?
Yes. And the gunas are sattva, rajas, and tamas, and they're just tendencies with different flavorings on it. With sattva being more bright, pure, calm, serene. Rajas being more passionate, activity, and tamas being more sleep, less activity, etc. So when we think about that, then another line of inquiry, and this is how it goes deeper. So you ask a question, and the line of inquiry gets even deeper. So now we're going deeper. First, we talked about awareness. Then we talked about awareness is the same in the awareness in the waker and the deep sleeper. Sorry, the dreamer. And then we're going deeper, and now we're including the deep sleeper. Now out of that level, two lines of inquiry came. Vasanas, and now how do the vasanas relate as the waker? So we're down here now, we're getting a deeper understanding of the process. If these vasanas and the gunas are functioning within this body-mind mechanism, they permeate the body-mind mechanism. Can we do anything about them? We can't do anything about them. It's like saying the seed has already sprouted. Can we go back and change the seed of the tree? No, we can't. In this moment, we cannot. So how would that practically apply in your life, having this understanding, if you understood it at a deep level?
No secondary involvement.
How
in
so?
whatever is going on.
Yes. So if there's a lot of activity in this body-mind mechanism, it would be observed that, oh, Rajas is functioning right now. And if there's sleepiness in the body-mind mechanism, oh, there's sleepiness right now. And if there's a calmness and serenity, oh, and peace, oh, sattva is being manifest right now. Notice already in the language, the emphasis is on the gunas, and there's a witnessing to it, a detachment to it already. And when you have that understanding with yourself, you'd have it with others. So now we have this understanding that spontaneously arose out of this inquiry. And now we can add one more information onto our last understanding, which we go back to the Bhagavad Gita, which says, beings function according to their vasanas/gunas. What can restraint do? There's nothing we can do about it in the here and now. And that would cut off the secondary involvement that creates the witnessing that he's talking about. Now, the disclaimer is you wouldn't want to use this as a tool. It's like, oh, I'm going to practice this. It's a natural outcome of the inquiry, which we just demonstrated. We didn't know vasanas and talking about the tree, that Bhagavad Gita verse would come in when we started 15, 20 minutes ago. The natural inquiry that the true understanding arises and manifests out of nowhere. And that's where real knowledge is. It spontaneously arose where it wasn't even a manifest 34 minutes ago. And that's true wisdom. rather than just reading something from a book and say, I'm going to practice it, or.
So in the dreaming and waking state, or in the deep sleep state, the dreamer and the waker don't even exist.
Yes. In the deep
So
state, the dreamer and the waker they don't even exist. Only the potential exists.
So it's kind of like if you take the tree and the seed analogy, it seems anyway that the tree is always there. Whereas with a human being who sleeps, goes to deep sleep, the
Right.
vasanas there's just the potential vasanas, and then there's the vasanas in action.
Right.
So it kind of makes it even more clear that there's nothing we can do, because those vasanas are just these potential things in deep sleep, and in deep sleep we're not even there. There isn't even a question of deciding something or initiating an action or anything.
Exactly. Very, very good, because we're not even there to change the vasanas at that level. We're gone. We're not there. So who or what can change at that level the vasanas? It's like we're trying to genetically modify the seed, but there's no way to do that. Which is very good. So we'd ask, well, who or what is the only thing that can modify those vasanas? It would have to be the pure consciousness.
Okay, this question I think relates, and it's just very much in my mind because my sister died yesterday morning.
Oh.
And sitting there with her body, of course, the personality was gone, activity was gone, any kind of, there's just the body. And so I actually started thinking about it, that the body is, actually I think it doesn't relate to this discussion because it's not about sleeping, dreaming, and waking. But I was thinking, I was thinking more about the sheaths, and maybe I should just ask that in a session, because it seemed like all that was left was the physical sheath.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. So you're referring to the life force has gone from the body.
Right.
So that is also a different line of inquiry.
Right.
And that's why I don't want to get off track too much, and we can.
Yeah, no, I kind of took it off track. It's just.
But the life force, when we think about the life force expresses it. One of its as the breath, and the breath. The one connection that we can make is that as the waker, the breath is always there. Until the breath is taken away, until death happens.
So then death happens, and what happens to those vasanas? What happens to the causal body that was manifested as my sister?
Well, let's talk about that, see if it comes up a little later, because we're going off.
I know, I'm taking it off. Yeah.
It's an important line of inquiry. It's very different.
Right.
The pointer in itself, because let's say the experience of seeing death and the prana leaving the body is like a screw in the wall, and we need a screwdriver to get the screw out of the wall. But right now we're talking about there's a nail that we have to hammer into the wall, so we need a hammer. And that's what this line of inquiry is. It's a hammer for the nailing the nail into the wall. And there's even, in the analogy, there'd be a nail in the wall that we have to get out. And so we have to use the claw part of the hammer to pull out. So one of the things that happens is with wisdom is that the line of inquiry and the tool for the certain concept or object of inquiry becomes clear, and that itself would be discernment.
Right.
All right, so let's start reading from here. Any questions about that before we read on? One more thing I would say is kind of going along what Mary's bringing up earlier was if there is a deep recognition that there's nothing that we can do about the vasanas. What can restraint do? What can changing do? What can control do? Then that would bring acceptance and that would bring peace. In relationship to ourselves and with others. We'd say, oh, that person's just, there's rajas functioning right there. Or I'd like to hang around that person's sattvic.
Yes. Questioner, does my realization help others? Maharishi, yes, certainly. It is the best help possible. But there are no others to be helped. For a realized being sees the self, just like a goldsmith estimating the gold in various jewels. When you identify yourself for the body, then only the forms and shapes are there. But when you transcend your body, the others disappear, along with your body consciousness. Questioner, is it so with plants, trees, etc.? Maharishi, do they exist at all apart from the self? Find it out. You think that you see them. The thought is projected out from yourself. Find out where from it rises. Thoughts will cease to rise and the self alone will remain. Maharishi, for whom is inside or outside? It can be only so long as it is. For whom are these two again? They both will resolve into the subject only. See who is the subject. Yes, the investigation leads you to pure consciousness beyond the intellect. Normal self is the mind. The mind is with limitations, but pure consciousness is beyond limitations and reached by investigation as above outlined. Maharishi, there is only one consciousness, which subsists in the waking, dream, and deep dreamless sleep states. In deep dreamless sleep, there is no I. The I thought arises on waking, and then the world appears. Where was this I in deep dreamless sleep? Was it there or was it not? It must have been there also, but not in the way that you feel now. The present is only the I thought, whereas the sleeping I is the real I. It exists all through. It is consciousness. If it is known, you will see that it is beyond thoughts.
Okay, that's good. Thanks. So, right here again, when he says to whom is inside or outside, because you start thinking, well, I mean, you have a question or a doubt. Is a consciousness in here the same as in the tree, or in this couch, or in this computer? And it's not a yes or no answer. The inquiry is starting to get you to think of positionality. By positionality, I mean, from what standpoint are you asking this question? And when you ask the question, it's from, so on this line of inquiry, it's similar to like the hammer about asking about consciousness, but it's a little variation. It's like, this is where you have the claw. You still have the tool of asking about consciousness, but instead of pushing in, nailing in, we're trying to pull out, just metaphorically. So it was saying, okay, I understand all this thing about consciousness, but let's investigate this consciousness, not so much through the 3 states of consciousness, but let's get a deeper understanding only in the waking state. And so he's saying, one question would be, well, does all this exist, this consciousness in me, is it the same as in the tree and in the chair? So that's the standpoint that he's asking from. So you could easily answer it yes or no, but that's not the point. The point is to ask, this is where the line of inquiry comes. From whom is inside or outside? Now, to go deeper, again, this is where you need information to help with the line of inquiry. And that information is that, again, you need to think about the 3 states of consciousness: the waking, the dream, and the deep sleep. But we're just going to look at the dream state of consciousness. Now, in the dream state of consciousness, when you're having a dream, it appears like there's a subject object. It appears like, let's say, you had a dream last night that a tiger was chasing you, and you're running away from the tiger. There seems to be you running away from the tiger in the dream. And there's all the emotions attended to it, sights and sounds. You can even tell if it's dark or light, night or day, all that. Upon waking, you say, oh, that was a dream. Now, from that standpoint of waking up from the dream, you ask yourself, was I any different from the tiger in that dream state? Or what's my positionality now of the dream state, and looking at myself as me running away from a tiger? Does that make sense? So the question now is, in the dream state, it's me running away from a tiger. In the dream, me and tiger. We wake up and we see the dream state, and within the dream state, we see me and tiger. Now, how do we look at upon waking up?
Well, it was all a dream, of course.
Yes.
All those were just the components of the dream.
Components of the dream.
Yes. Mm-hmm. You can hear me?
Yes.
Huh? But at the same time, it seems, and I mean, I clearly see that, of course, the me and the tiger, or whatever else, consisting, comprising the dream, it was all within the same realm, the dream world. However, even within that dream world, there seemed to be the identification with the body, with the dream body being chased by a tiger somehow. Because if sometimes you have a really vivid dreams, and when you wake up, you don't just realize, oh, it was all just a dream. You still kind of feel like, oh, wow, I was chased by a tiger or something. It was so intense. So there still was some kind of identification with the dream object.
Mm-hmm.
And is it like a secondary kind of already involvement, so to speak, in the dream, or is it like a normal, just the way it manifests itself?
So this is good. So this is where the next line of inquiry is. We understand, like you said, the dream it's all a dream. It's all within the field of the dream. It's no longer a subject and object. What I would say, they're all objects within the dream. And the dream permeates all the objects. So what he's trying to say now is, in the waking state, there is no subject-object relationship. It's all objects within the waking state. And we understand that this is the whole waking consciousness permeates all the objects in the waking state. Just like the ocean permeates all the objects in the ocean. Let's say the water is consciousness. The consciousness and so all the fish, all the creatures in the ocean are part of that consciousness, and that water or consciousness permeates all the fish or creatures. That's one level. Now, going even deeper is your question about identification, which is a very interesting idea. So, like you said, there was identification in the dream, right?
Mm-hmm.
And upon waking, you have kind of proof that there was identification, because it actually kind of feels like I was still identified. Right? So that provides an answer to a question that you quite haven't asked yet. And that is, if the dream state and the identification is like waking up to the waking state, the identification still seems to be there. What do you think happens when a person wakes up upon realization? What do you think happens to that identification?
It's still there.
It's still there, but the understanding is it's all within this field. It's all within this objects of consciousness. So that's how a person's able to respond to Bala.
I have a question having to do with, you were talking about the identifications there in the dream state, the identifications there in the waking state. But it seems like when the waking state is there, you're looking at yourself in the dream, or you're reflecting on yourself in the dream. Like, I might think about how I reacted in the dream.
Mm-hmm.
Or, I mean, there's a kind of process going on that doesn't go on in the dream. In the dream, I'm not aware of any self-reflection in a dream or any.
Well, Dimitri was talking about, which is another line of inquiry about this, in this particular, this line of inquiry is upon waking. That moment upon waking from a dream, there's this feeling of identification, which is a subtle awareness. Is the line of inquiry itself brings you to this more sensitive awareness that upon waking from the dream, there seems to be this identification that was there. And then as it spills over and there's fully a waking experience, then the waker takes over and says, I had that dream. But Dimitri's referring to that sort of transitory state upon waking from the dream, where there's still this idea of identification.
But the identification seems to take on a different nature.
Later, but he's talking about
later. But at that point of transition.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Which is itself a very subtle form of inquiry, which is another line of inquiry that Ramana and Nisargadatta said, if it happens spontaneously, upon waking, become aware of that consciousness that's coming into this waking body.
Mm.
And even that is a different line of inquiry from what Dimitri was talking about, that transitory identification from dreamer to waker. That's one type of inquiry. And then there's another line of inquiry between just having that awareness come in or consciousness come in, maybe from the deep sleep. But I don't want to, that we can talk about later. But right now, the nice thing about that line of inquiry, it pointed to this idea of identification.
So that identification, when you're waking up and the identification, when you're waking up, you're coming out of the dream, you're still identified in the way that you were in the dream.
Well, not exactly, but it's a transitory phase.
Oh, okay. But then there's something different in that transition for the sage.
Well, what we are pointing to is not that to ask about the sage so much, but whether if we use the analogy of dreamer to waker, and waker to self-realization, I asked Dimitri, what do you think what would happen to the identification? And he said it would still be there.
Okay.
Parallel.
Right. Okay. So I didn't get what you were doing.
It's just the understanding is that it's that the object in consciousness is all the objects are in consciousness, and consciousness permeates every object in consciousness. Just like all the sea creatures, there's naming form there, but there's water that permeates everything. So then if we went one more step a little deeper, then we'd say, well, following your train of thought, Mary, is if I fully wake up in the waking state, then what happens is the claiming, the doership or the authorship comes in and says, I had that dream. And you didn't have that dream. The dreamer had the dream.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the final line of inquiry for right now that we can think of is that, there's that transitory where there's still identification. All there is identification. But then when it goes from transitory to fully awake, you go back as the waker and say, I had that dream, because there's that sense of personal doership. I authored that dream. It's like, no, you weren't even there. You didn't even exist. So how could you author that? The dreamer had that.
And the dreamer meaning the dreaming state itself, so to speak,
Yeah.
right? The whole dreaming field. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the whole dreaming field. Yeah.
It almost seems like when the identification in the waking state comes in, it just has to kind of vacuum everything up. You can't, I don't know, what am I saying? It doesn't want to leave. It wants to make every experience its own. It doesn't want to leave any recognition that it's not.
Well, what happens is in this line of inquiry that we did, the second one that we just did, it points to how, it really points to the differentiation between identification and the sense of doership and authorship. Because what happens is that when identification happens, immediately the sense of authorship and doership, it comes into it like boom, just sucks right into it. Whereas, and what it's trying to, this line of inquiry is trying to think is like there can be identification without a claiming me, without a sense of personal doership, without authorship. Then now with this line of inquiry, you take the line of inquiry that we just did earlier, or like on the first half, and we say, because the next question would be, well, wait a minute, that sounds like it'd be, I understand that there would be sort of like this disidentification, but that sounds to me impersonal and that I would just be a robot. But then we go, no, because we just did our previous line of inquiry, that vasanas would be there. And vasanas are preferences. And the preferences would be manifesting, and that would be recognized too. And so that is helps with that misunderstanding. Oh, if it's just disidentification without the claiming me, that sounds like it's depersonal. I would just be a robot. I wouldn't care. I wouldn't have any feelings. Like, no, we know from our previous line of inquiry that vasanas are there. Vasanas will manifest as preferences in the awakened state, and we just have our preferences. Go, oh, okay, that makes sense.
Into one silly question, Bala, all those gunas, vasanas are basically the manifestations of gunas, the various combinations of gunas. But those gunas, where do they stem from?
The gunas are vasanas. The gunas are the it's like gradations of the vasanas. Like there's vasanas which are just unmanifested desires.
Yes, I understand that.
And then what we do is we notionally put qualities to those vasanas. The vasana will manifest and we say, oh, that's a sattva vasana. Or that's a rajasic vasana, or that's a tamasic vasana.
So basically, they're all some kind of impulses originating from consciousness, from somewhere deep in consciousness, just some impulses manifesting it themselves,
right,
so to speak. And then we group them. Okay, those are vasanas. I mean, those are gunas, sattvas, and so
yes.
forth.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, just conceptually, but still,
yeah, conceptualizing. Yes. And although you say that they manifest from source, and the seed is planted in the deep sleep state, they are existing now. The vasanas are existing now as manifested thoughts, feelings, and actions.
So I feel like now I'm starting to get obsessed about vasanas. But so over the course of a lifetime, all right, so there's the causal body, and let's say that at birth, all the vasanas would be there that will manifest in your lifetime, or because what about when they're a person? I mean, your basic personality and everything doesn't change, but there can be change.
So here the line of inquiry would be whose personality, whose lifetime.
Oh, okay. Right. Okay.
Because we would say, I've been up for probably 10 hours now, that the waker's only been awake for 10 hours. That's it. There's no lifetime.
Right. Okay. Okay.
Well, I've given a lot to think about today. So I think this is a stopping point. And next week we'll finish this chapter. Again, I remember, you know, Ramesh used to say, after hearing upon this, just forget it. And see if any of these ideas, any of these pointers will spontaneously arise. All right?
All right.
Okay. Namaste, everyone.
Namaste.